So welcome to you all. The event is organised to mark the 150th anniversary of the Paris Commune with the title Showing the Way Towards a New Society. And on the occasion of the 150th anniversary of the Paris Commune, which was strictly on March 18th, but we're holding this on a Saturday night, so our speakers are available. Truth and Memory is presenting a discussion on this momentous event in the historical struggles of the working class and ordinary people. And you could say the lessons of the Commune are not just in refusing to be disarmed by the rich of France and taking power themselves, but also in starting to build the new state arrangements that give power to the working people. And this remains so relevant to the modern world where people are still marginalised from decision-making. And we've seen that over the last couple of years, and particularly by the Westminster Parliamentary democracy that almost exclusively serves the rich. So tonight, firstly, we are going to show a film montage of the Commune accompanied by the Internationale in French, which was written by Eugene Potier, who was a refugee from the Paris Commune and who wrote the poem while in hiding in the aftermath of the massacres. And the poem was put to music by Pierre Gigueta. I may not pronounce that right. Yeah, Getier. As many of you will know, for very good reason, Internationale has become translated into almost every language and has become the song of the international proletariat. So that features that. And we will show the film again at the end of the meeting once we've concluded the meeting. And at the end, we will have the Internationale in English, which will be performed by the Progressive Cultural Association from Britain, which from 1978, actually, a recording. So following the film, I'm going to give a short introduction on the history of the Commune, and in particular the work of Karl Marx and Engels and the International Working Men's Association that took a prominent and leading role in the Commune, but most importantly in analysing its historic significance for the working class and people as it happened. Marx actually spoke during the Commune and spoke at many meetings on the Commune during its existence and so on. Then I'll introduce Lesley Larkum, who's our guest speaker, but no stranger to you, as you've seen at the beginning of the meeting. She spoke at our meeting on the fight for a democratic future over a year ago now. And she's going to talk on the Paris Commune and the need for political power. And then we can open the meeting for questions and comments on the Paris Commune. And then once we've had some discussion on that, we can then move on to another talk from Dr. Keith Hussein, who's our resident speaker. And he's going to speak on recovering the American leftist populist tradition and some work he's done on that struggle in the 1890s in the United States. And then this, of course, will then be followed by questions and comments. And I'll finally ask the speakers to sum up the end. So that's the program. I hope that's okay with everyone. Can everyone place themselves on muted unless invited by the chair to speak? And when I announce the discussion from the floor, you can indicate by raising your hand in the next to your name in the meeting. And it's different on different computers and laptops and so on. But if you have any difficulty, then you could also always send a message. I've got to let somebody in. Yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. You can send me a message in the chat. I may eventually see it. So without further ado, I think what we'll do is we'll start with the film montage. So just give me a few seconds to share that.
Debout les damnés de la terre, debout les forçats de la faim, la raison commence au cratère, c'est l'éruption de la faim. Du passé, faisons table rase, l'esclave, debout, debout. Le monde va changer de base, nous ne sommes rien, soyons doux. C'est la lutte finale, nous pour nous et demain. L'international sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, nous pour nous et demain. L'international sera le genre humain. Il n'est pas de sauveur suprême, ni Dieu, ni ses arbitres divins. Producteurs, sauvons-nous nous-mêmes, décrétons le salut commun, pour que le vol rende gorge, pour tirer l'esprit du cachot. Soufflons nous-mêmes notre forge, battons le fer quand il est chaud. C'est la lutte finale, nous pour nous et demain. L'international sera le genre humain. C'est la lutte finale, nous pour nous et demain. L'international sera le genre humain.
Okay, I'm just going to start off the proceedings by talking about the historical facts around the Paris Commune. And wanted to do this just because it isn't well known what happened with the Paris Commune, how it came about and so on. So the immediate context for the Paris Commune was the collapse of the Second Empire of Louis Bonaparte after his unsuccessful invasion of Prussia in 1870. And in these conditions, on September 4th, the working men of Paris proclaimed a republic. But as Marx points out, a cabal of place-hunting barristers took over the Hôtel de Ville in Paris, and what Marx described here as the monstrous gnome, and took over this with a statesman, Trochu, for their general. And as Paris starved, they presented their lapsed mandates from the previous assembly as the so-called liberal Republican ruling elite. In short, with their working class interests paramount, they developed a plan against the working class for the capitulation of Paris and France to the Prussian invading army. And their aim was to defeat the working people of Paris at all costs and establish another repressive republic. In other words, the civil war in France was a war of these usurpers of the 4th of September against the Republic of Paris and all of France, when only 1/3 of France was in the hands of Prussia. This is why Marx talks about the counter-revolutionary conspiracy against the working class and people. Paris was to be disarmed. This is why he said that the glorious working class revolution of March 18th took undisputed sway of Paris with its famous slogan, Vive la Commune. The Central Committee was its provisional government. The vote of March 26 sanctioned this victory with election of the Commune. And the Paris Commune tragically lasted only to May 22nd. Nevertheless, as Marx famously said, the communards stormed heaven and became a beacon for the working people throughout the world for the new society that was to come. The proletarians of Paris, said the Central Committee, in its manifesto of March 18th, amidst the failures and treasons of the ruling classes, have understood that the hour has struck for them to save the situation by taking into their own hands the direction of public affairs. They have understood that it's their imperious duty and their absolute right to render themselves masters of their own destinies by seizing upon governmental power. Marx, writing at the time, noted that this proletarian revolution remained so free from the acts of violence in which the revolutions and still more the counter-revolutions of the so-called better classes abound. This confirmed his conclusion of the nature of the coming proletarian power. Marx pointed out, after every revolution marking a progressive phase in the class struggle, the purely repressive character of the state power stands out in bolder and bolder relief. Paris, the central seat of the old government power, and at the same time, the social stronghold of the French working class, had risen in arms against the attempts of Thiers and the rurals to restore and perpetrate their old governmental power bequeathed to them by the empire. Paris could only resist because, in consequence of the siege, it had got rid of the army and replaced it by a national guard, the bulk of which consisted of working men. This was now to be transformed into an institution. Thus, the Commune famously confirmed Marx's thesis that the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready state machine and wield it for its own purposes. The Commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. The first decree of the Commune, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people. The police were at once stripped of their political attributes of working for the government and a repressive state and turned into the responsible and at all times revocable agents of the Commune. So were the officials of all other branches of the administration. From members of the Commune downward, the public service had to be done at a workman's wage. The vested interests and the representation allowances of the high dignitaries of state disappeared along with the high dignitaries themselves. Public functions ceased to be the private property of the tools of the central government and the state. Not only municipal administration, but the whole initiative hitherto exercised by the state was laid into the hands of the Commune. Having once got rid of the standing army and the police, the physical force elements of the old government, the Commune was anxious to break the spiritual force of repression, what Marx termed the parson power. The Commune de-established and disendowed the churches as proprietary bodies, part of the state. The whole of the educational institutions were opened up to the people free of charge. Thus, not only was education made accessible to all, but science itself freed from the fetters which class prejudice and governmental force had imposed upon it. The judicial functionaries as well were to be divested of that sham independence which had served to mask their abject subserviency to all succeeding governments, to which in turn they had taken and broken the oaths of allegiance. Like the rest of the public servants, magistrates and judges were to be elective, responsible and revocable. The Paris Commune was, of course, to serve as a model to all the great industrial centres of France. The communal regime once established in Paris and the secondary centres, the old centralised government would in the provinces too have given way to self-government of the producers. In a rough sketch of national organisation, which the Commune had no time to develop, it states clearly that the Commune was to be political form of even the smallest country hamlet, and that in the rural districts, the standing army was to be replaced by a national militia with extremely short term of notice. The rural communities of every district were to administer their common affairs by an assembly of delegates in the central towns, and these district assemblies were again to send deputies to the national delegation in Paris, and each delegate to be at any time revocable and bound by the mandat imperatif, formal instructions of his constituents. The few but important functions would still remain for a central government, were not to be suppressed, but were to be discharged by the communal and therefore responsible agents. Significantly, the unity of the nation was not to be broken, but on the contrary, to be organized by communal constitution and to become a reality by the destruction of the state power, which claimed to be the embodiment of that unity, independent of and superior to the nation itself. from which it was but a parasitic excrescence. Instead of deciding once in 3 or 6 years which member of the ruling elite was to misrepresent the people in Parliament, universal suffrage was to serve the people constituted in communes. Marx says its true secret was this: it was essentially a working class government, both legislative and executive, the product of the struggle of the producing against the appropriating class, the political form at last discovered and on which to work out the economical emancipation of labour. Marx pointed out that, in other words, there were no ready-made utopias. They had no ideals to realise, but to set free the elements of the new society in which the old society was pregnant. One of these elements was the role of women. It's important to stress the outstanding role women play in establishing and defending the Paris Commune, which is the first revolutionary seizure of state power by the proletariat, and one of the most glorious pages in the history of the international working class. The Union of Women, as their leading organisation, they organise working women at the barricades, ambulance stations and canteens. The Women's Union mobilises them as well to fight for women's emancipation. Each district of Paris has union committees for recruiting militant working women. Faced with the treacherous attack on Paris by Thiers' army, Nathalie Lamel, a member of the Union of Women, calls on women to join the work. She says, "We have come to the supreme moment where we must be able to die for our nation. No more weakness, no more uncertainty. All women to arms, all women to duty. Versailles must be wiped out." Another outstanding woman fighter is Louise Michel of the Montmartre Vigilance Committee, who is elected its president. The committee holds workshops, recruits ambulance nurses, gives aid to wives of soldiers, sends speakers to clubs and more. She serves as a fighter and a medical worker in the 61st Battalion of Montmartre. Marx says that the first attempt of the slaveholders' conspiracy of Thiers to put down Paris by getting Prussians to occupy it was frustrated by Bismarck's refusal. The second attempt, that of March 18th, which saw the formation of the Commune, ended in the rout of the army and the flight to Versailles of this treacherous government, which ordered the whole administration to break up and follow its track. The third attempt was late in May, when Thiers had, excuse me, I'm just going to let somebody in the meeting. Third attempt was late in May, when Thiers had assaulted all the retrograde elements, had assembled all the retrograde elements, including having made a deal with Bismarck for the release of the Bonapartist prisoners to Versailles. This was accompanied by the treachery which opened the gates of Paris to General Dewey on May 21st. Having claimed he was for peace, Thiers on the 22nd revealed his goal of civilization of Paris, which was to murder the communards and people on a mass scale. On this, Marx relates, each new crisis in the class struggle between the appropriator and the producer brings out this fact glaringly. Even the atrocities of the ruling elite in June 1848 vanished before the infamy of 1871. Marx concludes, to find a parallel for the conduct of Thiers and his bloodhounds, we must go back to the times of Sulla and the true triumvirates of Rome. The same wholesale slaughter in cold blood, the same disregard in massacre of age, sex, the same system of torturing prisoners, the same prescriptions, but this time of a whole class. The same savage hunt after concealed leaders, lest one might escape, the same denunciations of political and private enemies, the same indifference for the butchery of entire strangers to the field. There is this but difference, that Romans had no militaires, which is an early type of crank-operated machine gun, for the murder of the population of Paris. Marx concludes the self-sacrificing heroism with which the population of Paris, men, women, and children, fought for 8 days after the entrance of Versailles reflects as much the grandeur of their cause as the infernal deeds of the soldiery reflect in the innate spirit of that civilization. So much so that for proletarians of the world, for the working people of all countries since then and today, the Paris Commune is a flame that can never be extinguished. And in our conditions today, on the 150th anniversary of the Paris Commune, we should continue to learn the great lessons that that commune ignited to all in our fight for the new today against the old. That it is the working people that will provide solutions to the problem of society, showing the way forwards to the new society. So thanks for that. That's by way of introduction on the history of the commune. So let's just check there's nobody else waiting to come in. Oh, yes, there is somebody waiting to come in. Okay, so now I'd like to introduce Lesley, who's going to speak on the Paris Commune and the need for political power. As I say, she needs no introduction. She was our guest speaker over a year ago, and I think she's going to sort of concentrate on that topic, and then we can have some questions and discussion to follow that. So I'd like to introduce Lesley.
Thank you, Roger. Thank you very much. And I must say, it's a real honour to be here speaking at the 150th anniversary and 2 days of the Paris Commune, and to be with you all from the Truth and Memory group. Is it what's it? Anyway, because it's, as I was saying just in the chat beforehand, it's such a significant title that you've chosen, Truth and Memory, especially at this time, because the pressure's on us all to not remember our history, to not be in tune with the demands of the time, and just to accept decisions that are made on high on our behalf. So here we are, probing something which actually has been very little talked about anywhere in the media, or you can't find many references to it, which is what these historic events of the Paris Commune. So I wanted to start this talk entitled The Paris Commune and the Need for Political Power to address exactly that. What they established on March 18 in 1871 was something entirely new, and something that brought a new quality into being. And this quality necessitated the people to come to power. So unlike anything that had happened before, where arrangements had been entered into and there was some sort of balance of power, and the actual power remained within the hands of the elites, what happened on March 18 was the establishment of a proletarian government and a proletarian state, which just had not happened before. And with its establishment, what happened, even though in historic sense it only lasted for 2 months and then was brutally repressed, was that the idea of it lit a beacon for peoples and political movements across the world that we know led to the Bolshevik Revolution, to the October Revolution, and resonates today. So although it would appear that like Soviet Union was defeated and other aspects appear to have been defeated, nonetheless, that consciousness that a people can rise up and establish their own state and completely throw out the ruling elites and the bourgeois order, that knowledge can never be erased. Once it had happened, it established something entirely new, not just in actuality, but in the consciousness of all peoples to come. And that's what I want to explore today. I want to explore how that resonates today, and the lessons that we can learn now, and the fact what it reveals, which is that history is calling. History is calling on us to recognize, not just to celebrate, to recognize what those messages, what their experience says to us today. So I want to actually refer back to the first meeting that you invited me to, where I was talking about Hobbes and the arrangements that were put in place by Hobbes and Cromwell in 1649, which might seem slightly a long way away, but actually I think it's really germane, because one of the themes that I want to explore is that from that time, in fact, from early on in the 1600s, what was raging, certainly in Britain and throughout Europe, really was a civil war. So if one goes back to the time of Hobbes, the civil war that was being raged was over who decides, who has the right to make decisions in society. Oh, sorry. Who has the right to decide the future of society, and what are the arrangements in place for society to function? So one of the issues of Britain or England at the time of Hobbes and Cromwell, leading up into the 1640s, was that, as we know, Charles I was in power and was an absolute monarch, and there'd been arrangements in place whereby you had a parliament, and the parliament could eke certain favours for the people, in inverted commas. But the people were not represented at all. It was different sections of the ruling establishment and elites that were in fact represented. But in the early 1600s, as we know, the levellers were coming into being, and other peoples were, there was a foment, in fact, of discussion and political argument about what type of government, what systems, and also the need for political power for the people. And in fact, the Civil War challenged this authority, not just of the king, but of those who were seeking to maintain their rule by force. And of course, as we know, Charles I invoked his right of kings, his God-given right, and as a consequence, the tide turned against him, and you had the formation then of a parliament that then established a new mode of being. So why go into this? Well, the answer is that at the time, you could say that the people rose and were demanding their rights to be the decision makers of their own lives. But the establishment at the time, under Cromwell, and Cromwell went to Hobbes, actually managed to stymie the people and push them back down into their place as they saw it, as Cromwell and Hobbes saw it. And they created a new arrangement. And that arrangement was one of the fictitious person of state, where you then had two political parties, and those parties would represent the interests of the people. And if the people wanted anything done, they had to vote for one or other of these parties, who would then, with the authority of the fictitious person, or the artificial person of state, would then enact or have authority to enact this or that. But what was clear was that the actual arrangement of creating these two political powers and the artificial person of state was the vehicle for permanently keeping the common people out of power and stopping them ever from having any real say. The only say they had was every 4 years or whenever they were allowed to elect a new government. And that, at that time, stopped the Civil War from erupting even further, because people had to subscribe to this arrangement. So what you see in today's society is that Civil War is raging again. So now I'll come back to that in a moment, but there is a common thread here, because then you had the movements going on in France, and they overturned their monarchies, but then what they did was the ruling establishments, or the new ruling elites, describing themselves as the defenders of democracy and the defenders of the people, actually then stood in imposed even more repressive rule in the name of democracy and in the name of maintaining this new power. And they, because of the repression of the people and because of then the wars that broke out, you had this foment again coming to the fore in France. And what we also know is that in the background was the Franco-Prussian War, which ran for years. And the ruling establishments simply used the people as cannon fodder. You know, they were sent out to fight these wars or to defend or whatever. But again, there were famines, there were repressions, and eventually people began to rise up again. So in the run-up to the Paris Commune, the National Guard had been dragooned into fighting, you know, these wars in the Franco-Prussian War, and again they were they were being taxed heavily. The people were being taxed heavily. There was an issue of food. There was an issue of jobs, and instead of listening to the people and working with the people to solve the problems, they just became more and more repressive as a government. So what's significant is that the men of the National Guard actually left. Anyway, they joined the proletarians and joined the Paris Commune. So I'll just come to the beginning of Marx's report on the Paris Commune, because he talks about this. So let me just read what he says right at the outset of the Paris Commune. He says, "On the dawn of March 18, Paris arose to the thunderburst of Vive la Commune. What is the Commune, that sphinx so tantalizing to the bourgeois mind? The proletarians of Paris," said the Central Committee in its manifesto of March 18, "amidst the failures and treasons of the ruling classes, have understood that the hour has struck for them to save the situation by taking into their own hands the direction of public affairs. They have understood that it is their imperious duty and their absolute right to render themselves masters of their own destinies by seizing upon the governmental power. But the working class cannot simply lay hold of the ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes." So then it goes on. "The gigantic broom of the French Revolution of the 18th century swept away all these relics of bygone times, thus clearing simultaneously the social soil of its last hindrances to the superstructure of the modern state edifice raised under the First Empire, itself the offspring of the coalition wars of the old semi-feudal Europe against modern France." So what, and then he refers, and I think already, Roger, you've referred to that, haven't you, about how the military basically joined the revolutionaries. And in fact, the first decree of the Commune, and again, I knew nothing of this until reading Marx on the Paris Commune, but the first decree, therefore, was the suppression of the standing army and the substitution for it of the armed people. The Commune was formed of the municipal councillors chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards of the town, responsible and revocable at short terms. But I just want to come to this issue of the standing army and link it to now. So if you look at today's world, we actually have a parliament that right now is trying to increase police powers. We have a government which has just given itself billions of pounds in the middle of a pandemic, when it's saying that it cannot increase the pay of health workers more than 1%, when it says it cannot pay educationalists because it doesn't have the money. It has just paid itself billions to increase its nuclear capacity, to increase its belligerent capacity abroad. And you ask yourself, why? Why do they need all these police powers in the middle of a pandemic? Who is it that they're trying to stop? So you can see absolute parallels between what's going on in our society and what was going on then. So our standing army is is not defending us, is my point. And I might just leap ahead, because I was going to talk about this in a minute, but I might just leap ahead to what the role of women was in the Commune, because it's so uplifting and very wonderful to read. So if I can read you what Marx says, first of all, in the Paris Commune. He first of all talks about, he's rather rude about the women that are elsewhere and in Versailles. He says the coquettes had refound the scent of their protectors, the absconding men of family, religion, and above all of property. In their stead, the real women of Paris showed again at the surface, heroic, noble, and devoted, like the women of antiquity, working, thinking, fighting, bleeding Paris, almost forgetful in its incubation of a new society, of the cannibals at its gates, radiant in the enthusiasm of its historic initiative. And something which I learned in the reading up for this talk, which I simply had not known, was the outstanding role that women played. And that only 3 weeks into the Paris Commune, on April the 11th, 1871, the women formed the Union of Women. Now, there had been a Union of Women formed in England in 1868, I believe, but it only existed there. So you had this call on April 11th that there was going to be a meeting, and posters were put all over Paris saying that they called on women to come and defend and be prepared to die for the Commune. And they called on laundresses, on seamstresses, on bookbinders, and on milliners to attend. And people just came in their hundreds, and and they established a new organization called the Union of Women. And within days, the Union became one of the most important organizations of the Paris Commune. Socialist women played an indispensable role in organizing the working women of Paris to become communards. So I find that just a wonderful, wonderful story in itself. And Roger's already referred to Lamels and also to Louise Michel of Montmartre Vigilance Committee, which is interesting. And both women were outstanding fighters and are they are celebrated today. You find statues of them in Paris and across France. And it's no small thing that here we are on the 20th of March, 2021. And who are on the streets across the entire world is women saying they do not feel protected. They feel vulnerable in their societies because these societies allow attacks on them. And one of the things that Marx says in the Paris Commune, and one of the things that was marked out, was that finally women felt they were no longer vulnerable. They could walk the streets. And I don't know if I can find the quote actually. Sorry, can you hear me again?
Yeah.
Wonderful indeed was the change the Commune had wrought in Paris. No longer any trace of the meretricious Paris of the Second Empire. No longer was Paris the rendezvous of British landlords, brackets, exclamation mark, Irish absentees, American ex-slaveholders and shoddy men, Russian ex-burglaries, scarcely any robberies. In fact, no more corpses at the morgue, no nocturnal burglaries, scarcely any robberies. In fact, for the first time since the days of February 1848, the streets of Paris were safe, and that without any police of any kind. Isn't that incredible? Here we are talking about how do we solve this problem of women feeling vulnerable on our streets. Actually, every time I hear these discussions, I'm shouting at the radio because what you want to say is the problem isn't reprogramming men's heads, or it's not about some thing over there. It actually needs the recognition of the rights of women and the rights of all, but not just recognition, but the defense of those rights. So what we see happening in the Paris Commune is that these rights were being established by men and women, and that what was being established as a consequence and through the actions of all these bodies and discussions was the establishment of political power of the proletariat. And so this was why it was so threatening to the bourgeoisie and to all powers and countries around the world, because they could not allow this to happen. And so what we see, I don't know, I'm sorry, am I going on too long, Roger? Have I got time? I can't hear you.
Yeah, just wind up soon, so we can have some discussion. Yeah, okay.
So I there's a lot that I could say, but I'll stop. What I would say is this, that what the lessons are for today is that the question was one of empowerment, that humankind, in the act of the birth of the Paris Commune, was born. This conception that workers of all countries unite is the key. And in fact, if I can find the quote, and then I'll finish on that perhaps. Sorry. Anyway, what Marx says, I just can't lay a hand to it. Oh no, here it is. I think this is the thing that we want to focus on, and what gives the issue to today. So in today's world, what is being given rise to is exactly the same. We need now to do as they did with the Paris Commune and to speak in our own name. We need to recognize what is necessary, what is being given rise to out of these conditions. We see that our governments, our societies are increasingly subduing the people, and under the guise of the pandemic are trying to stop the voice of the people, to even stop the means that they say that are there through the parliament and whatever. But all that we are allowed to do is to vote a couple of years, and then there's so much going on and we're not allowed to comment. So it's so important at this moment that we consider things like forming an anti-war government where the issues of the people are brought to the fore, where the issue is one of what is necessary to bring about democracy, to end wars, to bring about the involvement in the entire people in the decision making of their lives, to allow the working class to constitute themselves the nation, and in fact to call for that. The working class must constitute themselves the nation. So let me just finish with this final statement of Marx, which is in the Paris Commune, where, it's my final statement taken from the Paris Commune. He says, if the Commune was thus the true representative of all the healthy elements of French society, and therefore the truly national government, it was at the same time as a working men's government, as the bold champion of the emancipation of labour, emphatically international. Within sight of the Prussian army that had annexed to Germany 2 French provinces, the Commune annexed to France the working people all over the world.
Thanks very much, Lesley. Much apprecited. Come back, a very difficult circumstances, and to carry on where you left off and convey how important the Paris Commune is in the whole history of the struggle for democracy, and also the whole history to today. That's brilliant. So we can now open that to comments and questions. Nobody in the waiting, everyone's Can you hear me okay? Because somebody complained that my microphone wasn't loud enough. Okay. If we move on to questions and comments, we've got the panel. Obviously, the panel is will be Lesley and who just spoken, and Keith Hussein, who's as well. So if you've got any questions on what's been raised about the Paris Commune, please indicate. And you can either text me, or everyone's thanking Lesley for a really inspiring talk. Anyone want to speak? Yes, Keith's got his hand up. Yeah, go on. Go on, Keith.
That was a fantastic talk, Lesley. It was fascinating. Thank you very much. I was just wondering what the Paris Commune's ultimate legacy is for today. I mean, you spoke a little bit about the situation that we had down in sort of Hyde Park and Clapham last week, which I think is highly relevant. Any more insights that you'd like to give us about that? Really, the contribution of women and sort of the empowerment that drove, what we can take from that today.
Do you want to reply?
Yeah, sorry about that. I just managed to shut my video. Yeah, thanks, Keith. I think first and foremost, it showed that it could be done, and it showed in the way in which it must be done. I think it showed that the working class and people cannot, in the words of Marx, hand over nor entrust their destiny to this or that member of the ruling class to misrepresent the people in Parliament. I love that quote. I think in terms of women, it shows you that the liberation of women is, as the song Liberation of Women says, it's a first-rate task. And it necessitates both the fight for the rights of women is a fight for the rights of all, or the way to ensure the rights of women is to fight for the rights of all. So the rights of it. One of my issues with the feminist movement as a generic, and it's not to criticize feminism as such, there's been many wonderful things. However, it tends to regard the emancipation and the rights of women as a separate thing in and of itself.
Uh-huh.
Whereas I feel what we see going on around the world is often the reportage is against men. You know, it's women saying that men need to change their behavior, or that it's men attacking women. But actually, I don't see it like that. I think that what's going on is women are speaking out in their own name en masse, not just in Britain or US. It's in India, it's in China, it's everywhere. And, you know, Australia, New Zealand, Ethiopia. Actually, there's another meeting going on straight after this on Tigray and Tigrayan women in Ethiopia, saying that rape must not be used as a weapon of war. So what you're seeing is throughout the world, women are standing up, but they're not on their own. Men are standing up alongside women, because the attacks on women, sorry if I'm getting a bit emotional, the attacks on women are stay organized in the same way racism is organized. You know, it's not a coincidence. Like when Thiers and all these people attacked the Paris Commune and brought it down, the brutality of it, and Marx comments on this as well, is that they killed they attacked women as they just attacked men and women. They didn't discriminate. They didn't have some sort of bourgeois nice value about women. No, it was the opposite. They hated these women because the women had stood up for the commune.
Class representatives, really.
Yes.
Total class representatives.
Because it became, actually, you're exactly right. Thank you, Keith. It became a class war. So the attacks on women going on around the planet, this is also part of the class discrimination and class war. You know, because it's not a casual thing. Women are not just vulnerable sexually. It's not that suddenly men have become, you know, that they're just... Women are vulnerable in all aspects. So like if you have a child in today's society in Britain today, apparently there's still, I think, the amount of childcare is like 4%. So if you have a child and you lose your job because of the pandemic, there is no protection for you under the law. There isn't anything. You can go and stay in one of these shelters, but actually there are limits on how many days you can stay. So it's like women are at the same time like made very vulnerable by their circumstances. I mean, it's not just about pay. It's not just, I mean, working class men are also paid badly. But it's just within our societies, working class people are made vulnerable on so many levels, and working class women are made vulnerable on so many levels. So these attacks against women are almost incited by the arrangements that are in place. And incidentally, when Cressida Dick was speaking recently, you know, she was asked on Radio 4, you know, what about these rights and about, you know, women being attacked and women want to go and protest. So her preoccupation is that these women shouldn't be doing something illegal and they should be wearing masks. And, you know, it's like, what? There's just no joined up thinking, or rather it's the opposite, actually. Cressida Dick and whatever are about introducing stronger and more militant, more repressive police powers. And actually these powers, which were shown in the demonstration, make the women even more vulnerable. Because so what we saw going on in the name of defending women, they're shoving women to the ground and violating their rights left, right and center. Peaceful women. So yeah, sorry, have I gone off piste?
No, that's all right. Somebody else wants
Great,
to come.
that's great. That's excellent, thanks.
Yeah, somebody else. Sonia, do you want to speak? You've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. I'd just like to say thank you, Lesley, for a really brilliant talk. It was so inspiring. And I really loved the links you made between the role of women in the Paris Commune and some of the challenges that women are facing in today's society under capitalism and patriarchy. And I completely agree with you that the roots of women's oppression are to be found in class society, and that is what we've got to focus on, at the same time as recognising women as a sex class with our particular species being, and that's as Marx calls it, and that has to be recognised at the same time. The question I was going to ask though was both to you and Keith about the issue of taking over the bourgeois state. The quote you used was that when Marx says it's not enough to take over on the bourgeois state, it has to be, and I don't think you quoted the second bit of that, which it has to be smashed and dismantled and reconstructed in the interests of the working class. And that, of course, is the million-dollar question of how that is done. And I wondered what your thoughts were, given that we just tried with Corbyn over the last 5 years, a non-revolutionary, fairly moderate social democrat who was absolutely crushed by the bourgeois establishment and all the, the sort of structures and authorities of the state. What are your thoughts on the next moves for working class and grassroots organisation? Thank you.
Thanks, Sonia. Lesley?
I think the quick answer to that is that we need to form an anti-war government. The long answer is that every peoples in power need institutions that reflect their outlook, and that outlook, you cannot appropriate the institutions and mechanisms of a previous, say, bourgeois power and use those in a socialist or communist state because they reflect the old arrangements. So like I was saying, in the arrangements put in place by Hobbes and Cromwell, like that wasn't a casual thing. They had just killed the king and they'd killed the authority of the king. So in order to maintain the rule of the ruling establishment, they needed to create arrangements that everyone then had to buy into. Now, actually, at the same time, we know the levelers were proposing something different, which actually came into being much later in the Paris Commune. That's to say, they were saying there should be universal suffrage, and there should be, or at least they were talking about it in embryo. But the structures put in place in 1649 and then hence after that, and written about in the Leviathan by Hobbes, were to reflect the keeping of power within the ruling elites, and hence why you had two political parties. So what was allowed was that the people could remain members of the state only if they pledged allegiance to this artificial person of state and to the arrangements put in place. So now to cut to the chase in modern terms. So I'm going to just read you something which I think is really important. I think what's being given rise to now, and you're seeing it in the rise of women around the planet, you're also seeing it in those people who stand up for the people's institutions. And by that I mean the health service, the education service, the care, the civil rights, the anti-war movement, the fight for the environment. All of these things are things that belong to the whole people. And what's going on is that what's being given rise to in the defending of these things on behalf of the entire society is what you might call the modern democratic personality, who's not self-interested and not trying to push this or that bandwagon, nor is related to property rights, nor is related to the ruling elites, but rather that is part of this this idea that there is not just individual relations anymore, or a class, like upper class or ruling class and working class, but rather that you have an ensemble of human relations, and that what is revealed by the issue is to have fidelity to the ensemble of human relations and to what is being revealed by these indispensable relations, and most importantly, as a consequence, the need for political power. So within that context, you have to consider what arrangements and what institutions you need to defend that. And that's going to be entirely new. Forgive me, does that answer your question, Sonia?
If I can just add as well, I think there is a very good point there, Lesley, about having to remake the state and remake institutions, because I think it's that sort of hierarchical relationship or structure within institutions. They're not sort of horizontal in the way that they should be. If you really want them to work for people. And I remember reading, I think it was from Maurice Glassman or somebody, he said something like, there's two key types of association within society. There's the institutional and there's the relational. And the relational is always horizontal and bottom up. And, we could say that all our relations here, all our associations here are relational. Yeah, there's nothing really that binds you into any institutional structure. So you could see ourselves as maybe a sort of metaphor for that force for change, for articulating a ground-up democratic movement. But certainly, just to touch on Sonia's point there, I think that in order to be completely transformative, we really will have to sort of adopt much more, that's a word, much more explicit forms of direct action, much more of a democratic grassroots movement, be able to see what sort of shared interests from many different types in society. I'm actually going to go on and talk a little bit about this on my paper, so hopefully I can pick up upon that there. I don't know if that's...
Yeah, thanks, Keith. We can... That's that's really a good way to conclude the discussion. And thank you everyone who's contributed to those question and answers so far. I think we are pushing a little bit for time, so I think we should move on to your talk, Keith. Keith's going to speak on the recovering the American leftist populist tradition and some work he's done on this struggle since the 1890s. I've got to concentrate on his presentation. So, okay, I'll just put up your first slide, Keith, and then you can.
Thanks, Rog.
We can go from there.
Hope you all enjoyed this anyway.
We will. That's it.
Got it?
Hang on. No, it's not quite. I've got to put it on slideshow.
Is that it?
That's it, yeah.
Can everybody see that okay? Okay, following on from Lesley's fascinating discussion, I'd like to talk to you tonight about the American People's Party and its attempts to radically reform politics around a worker-led government. It was formed in the 1890s as a democratic populist movement by an alliance of workers. And it has several interesting similarities and differences with the Paris Commune. Now largely forgotten, I'd like to go on and talk a little bit about the significance of the party and its enduring political legacy that still has relevance today. And looking at that slide there, I think it's almost important to recognize the economic context in which this movement emerged. America was still suffering what came to be known as the Long Depression. This was a prolonged global slump that began 20 years earlier and stretched into the 1890s, probably the longest slump in history. It caused severe deprivation amongst rural and urban workers. And at this time, it was estimated nearly half of the American population lived in abject poverty. America had returned to the gold standard in the late 1880s. It had previously left the gold standard in the Civil War. Now, this was an economic arrangement which said that the physical quantity of gold that was held by the Treasury also acted as a restraint on how much money supply could be allowed into the economy, how much capital could be allowed to circulate into the economy. So it imposed severe restrictions upon the ability of banks to do this. So this policy gave significant power to financial and business interests who could monopolize whole sectors of the economy through exercising this tight control over the US dollar and how many of these were in circulation. So it was in this context that the American People's Party was founded as a populist alliance of agricultural, railway, and mine workers in 1891. And this alliance, quite remarkably for that time, included multi-ethnic, Black American workers, and also women workers, which, as I said, was quite remarkable at this time. But, you know, quite a lot of women work in factories, in milliners, on farms, so maybe not. So I've just given you an image there of a ticket for the People's Party Convention. I think it's 1894, 1896. Anyway, similar to the Paris Commune, the People's Party and its political program were founded upon a mass democratic movement. And this movement articulated a broad working class based politics. But in contrast to the Commune, however, the People's Party was actually a political party, and it sought to achieve its aims within the existing, very limited democratic structures of Congress and the Senate. It wanted to work within the existing American political system. Of course, you've got to remember then that women, Black people, Native Americans didn't have the vote at that point. The People's Party rejected traditional party politics, and it opposed the interests of what were deemed corrupt financial, political, and business elites. And these were centered in New York, Washington, and Chicago. At this time, these figures were seen by the party and by many people as working on behalf of the corrupt elite. Okay, I'd like to say something a little bit more about the rise of the movement. In response to the politics of the corrupt elite and the negative impact it had on American working class life, the People's Party adopted a quite radical, transformative political program. It called for a progressive income tax, federal farm credit be issued very cheaply to the poorest farmers. It called for the nationalisation of the railways, telegraphs, even the banking system. And at this time, quite remarkably, we're talking about the early 1890s, it also called for an 8-hour working day, full enfranchisement for women, and the right of workers to form labour unions. And that wasn't actually granted in the United States until the 1930s during the Roosevelt era. So a campaign document, the National People's Party platform from 1892, forms its main policy, gives its main policies. It opens with a very bleak assessment of the experience of the ordinary worker in 19th century America. It describes a nation brought to the verge of moral, political, and material ruin. And if I can just have a little drink here. So it stated, they proposed to sacrifice our homes, lives, and children on the altar of mammon, to destroy the multitude in order to secure corruption funds from the millionaires. The fruits of the toil of millions are boldly stolen to build up colossal fortunes for a few, unprecedented in the history of mankind, and the possessors of those in turn despise the republic and endanger liberty. That almost sounds like it's something that could come from Marx, doesn't it? Almost like something from Marx's writing on the Civil War. Next slide, please, Roger. Okay, so if you have a look there, you see the next slide. There's an image there. I'll just go into this a little bit more now. Consequently, the popularity of the movement grew in predominantly rural strongholds. And this was after widespread industrial action, highly publicised marches. You had the first march on New York. You had the railroad strikes of the 1890s, early 1890s, led by Eugene Debs. And so places like Oklahoma, Kansas, Arkansas, the People's Party began to sort of gain strength. It also began to enjoy popular support in more urban areas, such as California. At the 1896 Democratic Convention, William Jennings Bryan, who you can see there in the image, who was a very popular advocate of workers' rights and a brilliant speaker, actually won the support of the Democratic Party at that National Convention as their presidential candidate. And this was unprecedented. This was a huge shock that went throughout the American establishment. Nobody expected Bryan to pick up the nomination. It's almost like Bernie Sanders times 100, if you can imagine it. So the delegates rejected the incumbent Grover Cleveland, who was seen as part of the established elite class. Jennings also picked up the People's Party nomination for the presidency too. So he had 2 party nominations for the presidency. So it was during the campaign at this time that Jennings Bryan made his famous Cross of Gold speech. And this attacked the restrictive economic policies imposed on the American people by the gold standard, and also attacked the role of business leaders as the cause of ongoing economic depression. Obviously, this period leading up to the presidential election was marked by high unemployment, industrial unrest, and deepening inequalities. And I think Roger has a clip here for us that
I'll have to just hang on. I'll just get the clip up.
So this details Jennings' Cross of Gold speech. You can see his populist style, and if you listen carefully, there's some really lovely traditional bluegrass music in the background. Are we there yet, Roger?
Hang on. Sorry about this. I'll just get this up. Oh, hang on. I've got to get this.
Right, I think you've got that.
No, I haven't. It's got to share it and actually share the sound this time.
By saying to them, you shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold.
The Populist Party then meets in their convention a few weeks later, and they say, well, you know, a lot of them know Bryan personally because he's from Nebraska. He talks like a populist. He uses their sort of patented vocabulary, and he's with them on this one big issue of currency reform. He's denouncing the gold standard.
They tell us that the great cities are in favor of the gold standard. We reply that the great cities rest upon our broad and fertile prairies. Burn down your cities and leave our farms, and your cities will spring up again as if by magic.
And so they say, well, he's not with us on these other issues, but he is with them on this one big issue of the currency. Meeting in their convention, they decide that they're going to get on board the Bryan train, and they're going to endorse the Democratic candidate for the presidency. At first, it looks like Bryan is going to win, and he goes on the Whistle Stop tour. I think it's the first one ever. He's this kind of Lincoln character. He is a man of destiny.
Thank you, Roger. Okay, so as I said, he wanted to reform the American economy and basically take it off the gold standard. This would allow workers more democratic and cheaper access to loans and capital, and would allow them to be paid higher wages. It would also allow any incoming populist government to introduce more expansionary economic policies and obviously be more redistributed. Okay, I'd like to say a little bit now about the 1896 election and the Conservative fight back, as you can imagine. In response to Bryan's programme, the political and business elites heavily mobilised against the People's Party and its supporters. The Republican Party launched a prolonged smear campaign funded by bankers and industrialists. People like Robert Carnegie, John Rockefeller, JP Morgan. This costs an unprecedented $3.5 million on $94 million in today's money. Doesn't sound a great deal, but bear in mind this sort of strategy of a large campaign funded by industrialists, bankers, hadn't been tried before. This is really what sets the pattern for subsequent US presidential elections. So increasingly, the Republicans personalized their attacks on Bryan as a dangerous religious fanatic whose policies would destroy the economy, while Republican rival William McKinley was portrayed as a moderate champion of jobs, sound money within the conservative press. Now, as the campaign went on, the financial disparity between the two parties grew larger as the Republicans funded more and more rallies, speeches, they had torchlight parades, they also distributed hundreds of millions of pamphlets attacking Bryan and praising McKinley. This is part of this new campaign strategy that was adopted in America. Eastern banks also sent representatives into the Midwest towns and actually warned farmers that their homes would be foreclosed and bankrupted if they dared elect populist politicians. It was almost a direct threat. So you can see similarities with the type of things you hear today. Also, it's worth mentioning at this point, Bryan was also, like Bernie Sanders, like Corbyn, was accused of being an anti-Semite because he was attacking finance capital. Okay, so renowned academics, lawyers, religious figures, economists were all recruited to this campaign. The support for McKinley's more conservative policies increased, while Bryan's more radical policies began to lose support among Midwestern farmers, among some of the more wealthy factory workers. Now, Roger, if we can...
Together against Bryan, and they build a kind of stereotype against him to describe what is wrong with Bryan. And they say, well, Bryan is, he's mentally ill, he is anti-intellectual, he's talking about economics, and he knows nothing about economics. He has this crackpot theory. The gold standard is the pillar of the world economy. This is what holds up the whole edifice. And he isn't, he's an anti-intellectual because he doesn't understand that. He doesn't understand modernization. He doesn't understand globalization. And these farmers who support him are these kind of complete rabble. These are a lower breed of humanity. These farmers out in Kansas, these farmers who are so enthusiastic about the Bryan campaign. The whole campaign becomes this effort to keep the rabble in their place. This is a campaign between orthodoxy and correctness and the ruling class of America, the rightful hierarchs, the rightful elites of America, versus demagogues and the rabble who want to try to rise above their place.
Thank you for that. That was excellent. So again, you can see there the similarities with the type of things that you heard in the Sanders campaign and the Corbyn campaign. I mean, it could almost be describing momentum there, couldn't it? How sort of certain quarters viewed momentum in the sort of liberal press. Ultimately, on election day, the Republicans secure a solid victory, particularly in the Electoral College, and they carry the core of the eastern and northeastern vote. Bryan retained support among the farmers in the rural south, west, midwest. McKinley also gained large majorities among the middle class, among skilled industrial workers and large-scale farmers. Clearly, Bryan had failed to form the necessary coalition. Having said that, the national vote was much closer. McKinley only defeated Bryan by something like 602,000 votes, and that was, I think, a turnout of about 50 million. So McKinley received something like 5% more than Bryan. So what lessons can we learn today from the experience of the American Populist Party, the American People's Party, and populist politics in the 1890s? Well, we can say that the People's Party and the populist movement emerged at a historical moment when ordinary workers came to recognize that the American social order, controlled as it was by established business and political elites, was fundamentally opposed to the material interests of ordinary people. And the establishment still take that line today, actually. More recently, European liberal commentators have been quite strident in their dismissals of left populist politics, or just populist politics. These are seen as regressive and negative. Political science Jan Werner Muller argues that the rise of populism is not just a danger or a threat, but it represents a degraded form of democracy that Western societies need to rid themselves of as swiftly as possible. It's almost repeating, the line that was adopted there against Bryan. Muller's aptly titled "What is Populism?" his recent publication boldly declares that it's a political philosophy that's not only anti-elitist, but also anti-democratic and anti-pluralist. It's also identified with the far right. Now, there's other obvious barriers against historical attempts to forge an electorally successful left politics controlled by the people in America and Britain. And these are the managerial structures within the Democratic and Labour parties, which we've recently seen conspired to work against the most popular candidates. Following Syriza and Podemos' defeat in Greece and Spain, very similar grassroots political parties, and the defeat of Corbyn's Labour in 2019, scepticism has grown among the left as to how possible, how viable populism is as a political strategy for the left. While these movements put forward demands in favour of democracy, equality and economic justice, ultimately it was their refusal to confront extreme centrist as much as conservative forces within their own parties that brought about the ultimate defeats. Now, if we ignore this ongoing problem, then the left may well be heading down the path to insignificance and self-isolation, if you pardon the pun. But this is something that we might want to take up in the discussion. I'll just finish by saying it's therefore urgent that the original leftist conception of populism, as it was conceived by people like Bryan, Roosevelt, which is now captured by notions of demagoguery and proto-fascism, well, it's important that we rediscover and reclaim this leftist tradition. The objective of a contemporary left populism should be to establish links between a variety of grassroots social movements and progressive political forces. Then we can orientate these toward a radical recuperation of our broken democracy. Thank you very much. I'll put a link up to the documentary on this. Further reading, if anybody wants this document, I'll post it in the chat. And I hope you all enjoyed that.
Thanks very much, Keith. All your hard work that's gone into that.
Thanks, everybody.
I knew absolutely nothing about the populist movement in America, so it's got that in common with the Commune, that they don't want these things to be discussed. I'm sure we haven't really got that a lot of time for discussion. Does anybody want to speak on this? Ask a question or ask Keith a question? Yes, Lesley?
Yeah, Keith, the obvious question is, do you think that Bryan and the populist movement and the People's Party they formed were inspired by the Paris Commune?
Well, I think, like I said, there's certainly similarities. It was ground up. It was a ground up movement. Really, I suppose up to that point where we talk about the Paris Commune, politics hadn't really been in the hands of ordinary people. And it seems to me that various political movements around the world, in the wake of not just the Paris Commune, but also things like the American Civil War and the worldwide recession, various radical political movements formed in the aftermath of this. You have the formation of the trade unions, even at the formation of the suffragettes, the first anti-colonial movements as well. So, I mean, I'd certainly say that the Paris Commune played a role in this in terms of influence. The other thing I think that strikes me was the role of women in the People's Party, because this was the first time women had been given prominent roles, not just as party members and activists, but actual campaigning politicians. This is the first time female politicians began to emerge in the United States and sort of make an influence in the Senate, well, in the Congress first. I think what the two have in common is a genuine desire to bring about transformative democratic politics that places ordinary people as political agents of their own destiny and that wants to radically reform institutions, only that the People's Party decided that it would work better within the existing structure. So there's a very, very definite difference there. You know, the Commune were obviously working to radically transform the political model, whereas the People's Party saw the way to do that as working within the existing American Senate, Congress, congressional structure. I don't know if that answers your question, Lesley. It is something that I've been thinking about, you know, and I probably should have.
No, not at all. I wonder if I could just add a comment actually to that. I think what you said is very lovely. What I think actually is the theme, and perhaps it kind of sums up this evening's meeting, is that what was given rise to was the fight of the new against the old. And what you see, the spirit of that and the quality of this fighting for the new is what I think actually has been taken up by peoples in various movements around the world. And all the subsequent movements, if you like, reflected that you could establish something new, and that the old had no right to claim its right to rule just based on the fact that it had been there for however long. That actually the quality of being new, and that the people must come to power, I think was now the what was given rise to out of that.
I certainly think they share a similar populist rhetoric and politics, certainly beyond all doubt. And it's infectious as well when you sort of give people sort of, you know, a glimpse of an alternative society, of how a society could really be. You know, that happens very, very rarely, and it's often closed off the possibilities for a long time after that. And we've seen it so many times, haven't we? We talked about it at the last meeting that you spoke at.
Absolutely.
Okay, is anybody else wanting to say anything at this point? Because we're now at 7:30, which we said we would finish at. Okay, so I'd like to thank you all for coming tonight. It's been great to have people from South Tyneside who come to our meetings, but also people from all over the country that have taken part tonight. So thank you very much for that. And we will continue to, Truth and Memory Committee will continue to do its work, and you're all very welcome to play a part in that. And you should have my email if you want to get in touch with us, or Keith, because he's a resident of the committee. But I suppose I would sort of conclude the meeting on the note that that 150 years ago, the working class and people of Paris raised the banner of what was still to be sorted out, what Lesley has shown is still to be sorted out in Britain today. But as Mark said, the political form at last discovered under which to work out the economical emancipation of labour and provide the solution to the problems facing society of their time. That flame will never be extinguished. Viva la Commune.
Arising prisoners of starvation, arising wretched of the earth, for justice thunders condemnation, a better world's in birth. No more tradition change or bind us, arise ye slaves, no more and crawl. The earth shall rise on new foundations, we have been not, we shall be all. 'Tis the final conflict, let it stand in his place. The international shall be the human race. 'Tis the final conflict, let it stand in his place. The international shall be the human race. We want no condescending saviors to rule us from the final conflict, let it stand in his place. The international shall be the human race.